For a number of years, the repair shop provided viewers with solace, a sense of nostalgia, and the peaceful satisfaction that comes with restoration. On the other hand, something more profound was taking place behind the familiar instruments and the hands of the experts. It was beginning to take shape that day. It wasn't until now that anyone had a complete comprehension of Blades and Suzie Fletcher. It is not about hearsay or gossip at this point. You need to be resilient, have good timing, and have a connection that is built on trust. For the very first time in history, finally, Blades divulges all of the information regarding Suzie Fletcher and opens up about her. The repair business held more than just a television set. An idea that was proposed to showcase craftsmanship and the stories that are contained within old, damaged artifacts was the origin of the repair shop, which was initially conceived as a daytime television project. With the beginning of production, however, it became abundantly evident that this was never going to be merely a television show for the individuals who were working behind the scenes. A significant number of the cast members and crew members found the workshop to be a safe haven, a consistent presence that provided them with a sense of stability in the midst of personal storms and the unpredictability of life. One of the first people to experience this transition in a profound way was Blades. His life narrative was far from smooth. When Jay was a child, he experienced traumatic events that left him with scars that he carried with him far into adulthood. After that, there were periods of homelessness, which were interspersed with issues with mental health and extended periods of time during which it appeared impossible to obtain meaningful job. The repair shop did not merely provide him with a salary or a platform. Rather, it provided him with a role that provided him with a feeling of belonging and meaning in his current life. It was a place where his abilities were recognized and appreciated, and where his presence was significant. In later years, Jay would ruminate on this transition that was understated but profound. Is it possible that the ritual of entering a room where the aroma of leather and wood filled the air, where goods that were broken came in one day and were left fixed the next, was a form of self-therapy? The tales that accompanied those items, recollections that had been handed down from generation to generation, which often contained terrible and sometimes happy events. The workshop was endowed with a more profound purpose that went beyond the superficial activity of repairing objects. On a human level, it was about providing healing, making connections, and restoring lost things. But at the same time that Jay was discovering an unexpected purpose in the rhythm of repair, another person was about to walk through the barn doors. She was carrying her own silent story of loss, and she was unaware that she was beginning the beginnings of a link that would come to define both of their paths. The trip that Suzie took back to the United Kingdom. Not only was Suzie Fletcher going back to England, but she was also going back to her native country. For her, it was a fresh start. Her life in the United States was marked by both love and terrible anguish, the sadness of her husband's death, and the silent erosion of her identity during a marriage that had left her emotionally weakened. She was leaving behind a life that was marked by both love and deep suffering. In the years that have passed, she has made public statements regarding that period of time, admitting that she had lost her self-assurance and had become a very reserved and reclusive individual. Nevertheless, in 2016, a change occurred. When Suzie returned to the location where she had attempted to construct a life for herself, she did not do it with the intention of retreating, but rather to rebuild. What brought her back wasn't television. This was a craft. When it came to steadiness and control, saddlery had always been her language of choice. The purpose of her visit was not to attract a crowd. She showed up for work. Accepting a position at the repair business meant taking a step into the unknown. She was hesitant, and she even showed some fear of the cameras. A performance, on the other hand, was not what she discovered in that old barn. Community was the focus. Help was provided by the fact that her brother Steve was already a member of the squad. However, it was Blades, a man she had never met before, would provide her with something that was far more surprising. The void. Space that is calm and still. There are no inquiries or presumptions of any kind, simply patience. At that point, she started to feel better. Nor all at once, nor in a tremendously dramatic manner, but rather in the mundane moments of doing what she was most familiar with. Inside the company of those who did not require her to be anything other than who she already was. It was the people who gradually began to matter more, and none more so than Jay, who, without knowing her past, immediately supplied what she needed the most, which was a quiet space and patient company. Despite the fact that Suzie had returned for the work, it was the people who ultimately became more important. Encouragement without attention. When Suzie Fletcher first started working at the repair business, she wasn't very talkative. In spite of the fact that she did not dominate the space, her presence was significant. She rarely spoke the things that she had been through, but she exuded a calm and thoughtful attitude that was impossible to miss for those who paid close attention. This was not because she was trying to conceal anything. Rather, it was because the wounds were more recent. Filming a television show, with its bright lighting, background talk, and continual movement, was not the kind of place where you casually unpack sadness. Her pain stayed close to the surface, and when she was filming the show, she was always moving around. Yes, Jay Blades was aware of that. He did not exert any force. He did not conduct any investigations. In its place, he constructed a kind of gentle perimeter around her, not with the intention of isolating her, but rather to safeguard her. The manner in which he offered support was understated. Rather than making grand statements or making actions that seek attention, just be present. All it took was a gaze, a pause that was perfectly placed, and the kind of consistent, wordless care that suggested, take your time. There you are. After the cameras had stopped rolling and the workshop had become quiet, Jay would frequently remain in the vicinity. Simply enough to provide her with company, but never close enough to make her feel crowded. And when Suzie's expression showed a trace of uncertainty, or when the weight of her past threatened to manifest in her work, Jay would answer with a faint knowing smile, which was a signal that you were doing just fine. In order to improve her self-assurance, it was not necessary to flatter her or give her a pep talk. Jay was aware of the fact that genuine support might sometimes consist of nothing more than being a steady witness, allowing someone to be seen without being scrutinized or corrected. He did not attempt to enhance Suzie's work for the sake of television and instead allowed her to take the lead in her own craft. That regard was the most important thing. In an industry where events are frequently choreographed or raised for effect, Jay's support was genuine, thoughtful, measured, and without any anticipation of what the recipient would gain from it. It was also not based on idea that he was acting. Jay had personally experienced adversity, including years of poverty as a youth, struggles with dyslexia, and despair. A period of time during which he was without a home, which compelled him to start over from the ground up. As a result of such events, he became more than just empathetic. Through their influence, he had an almost instinctual capacity to read under the surface, to perceive sorrow that was not being expressed, and to respond with calm care. It wasn't just Suzie's talent that he liked about her. In spite of the burdens she was bearing, he witnessed someone surviving, someone who continued to come up day after day with a quiet dignity. Jay had a great deal of respect for that kind of strength because it did not attract attention. In a world that most of the time requires vulnerability for public consumption, his help was provided without any conditions attached. In order for Suzie to simply exist in peace, Jay made it possible for her to simply be without the need to act or explain anything. In and of itself, that was healing through his deeds, which were relatively minor but nonetheless continuous. He assisted in transforming a section of the workshop into something that was more than just a television set for Suzie. It turned into a space where the process of healing could start to take root. Calmly, and at her own rate, she continued. The calm support that Suzie received, which was never forced and never performed, brought about something that she hadn't experienced in a very long time. Risk-free. She would finally be able to accomplish something that she had previously considered to be impossible, which was to open up about her past in her own words, which was the book that she had been frightened to write. This was made possible by the same sense of safety that she had. Suzie's presence in the barn remained consistent throughout the course of many years. It was reassuring to know that there was a silent power behind a significant number of the repairs that brought both people and items back to life. Her hands were the ones who did the talking, and for a considerable amount of time, that was sufficient. But away from the cameras and restoration benches, there were aspects of her tale that stayed untold. These were unpleasant recollections, personal sadness, and a sense of loss that she did not know how to communicate. While the passing of her spouse was a significant event, it was not the only thing that changed her life. It encompassed all that came after it: loneliness, personal conflicts, and the fear of revealing too much information are all factors. Over the course of many years, Suzie had kept everything a secret, and she was not even sure how to start if she ever decided to speak about it. The concept of publishing a memoir had been brought up in the past, but it felt too raw and too close to the heart. That was followed by a discussion that took place this morning, during which she and Jay appeared together to discuss her life and the upcoming book that she published. It was a period of vulnerability, and Jay, in keeping with his character, did not provide a significant amount of encouragement during that time. Instead, he leaned in close and made a straightforward statement. "Come on, Saz, you are capable of accomplishing this. Plus, it will be a really cathartic experience." It was that remark that stayed with her. The advice that Jay was giving was not given from a distance. The fact that he knew her and had witnessed the burden that she carried led him to believe that writing could be the means by which she could finally let go of some of it. It wasn't a shove from him. His words were comforting, not as a finished product, but rather as a process. He viewed the book, something that might assist her in releasing aspects of herself that she had lain dormant for an excessive amount of time. Indeed, he was correct. As Suzie conceded in a subsequent statement, the journey of writing turned out to be extremely emotional. In reality, it continued and opened up a great deal of memories that I had previously repressed. In light of the event, she expressed, "I am filled with a great deal of happiness and contentment." Jay did not make any request to read her pages. In no way did he attempt to micromanage or direct the narrative. Instead, he appeared in more subtle and significant ways, providing her with an ear to listen, quiet encouragement, and the type of trust that allowed her to feel comfortable coming forward with her thoughts and feelings. At certain points, she found herself unable to cope with the writing, and memories that she had believed she had buried for good came flooding back to the surface. Despite this, she continued on, well aware that she did not have to confront everything by herself. It turned out that the book was more than just a recounting of the events that took place. It was an emancipation, a chance to go back and go through the most difficult times in her life and eventually let them go, not with resentment, but with understanding. Not everything was resolved by it. She was able to reconnect with herself in ways that she had not anticipated, despite the fact that grief does not operate in such a manner. This literary journey was just one component of Suzie's gradual and steady recovery from her illness. On the other hand, the safe space that she discovered in the barn and the silent support that surrounding her there were the factors that truly laid the groundwork for her healing. With a secure environment for her to break. Before Suzie started talking about her background in public, she had already spent years quietly rebuilding her life on camera. This was before she started speaking about her past. She let her job to spoke for her for a considerable amount of time. However, something more profound was taking place behind the scenes, and Jay Blades was one of the few individuals who had been able to recognize it at an early stage. Recently, Suzie disclosed information that only a select few others were aware of. A dysfunctional marriage in the United States had been her home for many years. The weight of what she had been through was evident, despite the fact that she spoke with the remarkable restraint that she does. She stated that she had fully lost its confidence. "I have developed into a person who is quite reserved and reserved." When she relocated back to the United Kingdom following the passing of her spouse, she described herself as a broken person. It was a moment that took many spectators by surprise, but those who had worked alongside her, such as Jay, understood exactly how much strength it needed to get to that point. There was more to the repair shop than just a job opportunity. It turned out to be a silent lifeline. It was a safe place, as Suzie had described it, and she meant it. She was never pressured by Jay to talk before she was ready to do so. Even when the cameras stopped rolling, his support continued. Whatever the case may be, it was most important when no one else was looking at it. When Suzie eventually described the repair shop as a location that healed her from the inside out, it wasn't simply the workbench or the craft that she found healing, but also the atmosphere. In addition to her brother Steve, it was the folks and Jay who were involved, was the driving force behind that. In an interview, she stated that Jay was a significant contributor to her beginning to believe in herself. This was not a single instant. 1,000 of them were of a smaller size. The belief that he showed in her without having to say much, the calm way that he checked in without probing, and the space that he provided for her to work at her own speed were all things that he did for her. That conviction turned out to be something she could cling to tightly. It was a difficult time for her to blend in with the age of the case when she started writing her memoir, which was another challenging step in the process of recovering her story. Jay offered some support in a subdued manner. However, the safe space that she discovered in the barn did not erase her past. Rather, it provided her with a different way to carry it with her. It was not with fanfare that she moved from silence to self-expression. Rather, it was with a kind of calm conviction that she could do it on her own terms. Jay's presence helped her transition from silence to self-expression. In no way did he attempt to claim credit. This is not who he is. But Suzie has made it quite obvious that Jay was the one who assisted her in regaining her footing at the time when she required it the most and provided her with the space to break so that she could start the process of putting herself back together again. While their relationship developed in the background, Suzie and Jay were soon thrust into a different type of spotlight as a result of the growing reputation of the repair shop. This was a spotlight that neither of them had ever sought for, but they were unable to ignore. In public appearances, private realities are contrasted. Observers started to take notice of the lack of activity as the repair shop's popularity skyrocketed. Suzie Fletcher and Jay Blades have maintained a consistent relationship. Curiosity was piqued by their character dynamic on television. There were those who perceived it as a friendship. Something more profound, perhaps romantic or even family, may be the focus of others. On the internet, there was a lot of speculation going on, with comment sections and headlines attempting to describe something that neither of them had ever discussed in public. However, the audience was unable to recognize that this relationship had very little to do with labels or classifications. It was not founded on performance or romance by any means. Something that was slower, more sophisticated, and anchored in profound recognition was what it was. Jay had carried his own unsaid anguish for a very long time. His early life was defined by volatility, and he has been honest about his difficulties with mental health and the urge to keep moving even when he was breaking down on the inside. As he was in the past, the Prince of Wales, and the only method of communication that I am aware of for interacting with people. However, more lately, his personal life has been trending in the news because his ex-wife has publicly accused him of engaging in behavior that is controlling and coercive. Jay's assertions have never been openly addressed in depth ever before. Nevertheless, the weight of those accusations hung in the air, adding more layers to the way that people perceived him. Having engaged in behavior that was both controlling and forceful against his wife, who was no longer with him. In addition, it is possible that anything changed during that period of intense inspection. While Suzie was hurting, hesitant, and attempting to piece herself back together after a lengthy and emotionally harmful relationship, Jay noticed something in her. Suzie had come at the barn in a state of grief and uncertainty. Not only the lack of communication or the guardedness, but also the effort that is required to function while struggling to stay alive. That effort, which was familiar to him, struck a chord, but it's possible that it wasn't only empathy that pulled him to assist her. There is a possibility that when Suzie went through her past, it served as a mirror for Jay to look at his own life. Sincerity, vulnerability, and a reluctance to let pain harden her are all qualities that she possesses. It is possible that it prompted him to contemplate the manner in which he had behaved in his own personal relationships. This could not have been a simple task. It is sometimes the case that witnessing the healing of another person compels us to confront aspects of ourselves that we have not yet confronted. There was never a single public comment that Jay made regarding Suzie's influence. Not a single word was said by him regarding the rumors, the charges, or the significance of any of it. On the other hand, people who were close to him observed a change, a more subdued manner and a presence that was more reflective. And for Suzie, he continued to be a reliable support. Even though he was not flawless, but he was present. Suzie and Jay maintained a deliberate silence in spite of the public attention and the rumors that were circulating about them. This silence served as a protected area that allowed their relationship to endure without being affected by any demands from the outside world. A state of stillness that served to shield them. Jay Blades found himself in high demand during the course of the repair shop's meteoric rise in prominence. It was through book sales, ambassador roles, and documentaries that he became a public personality that extended far beyond the timber and tools that were stored in the barn. However, despite everything that was going on, Suzie Fletcher continued to be the calm center of his life. Suzie never intended to attract notice. It has been characterized by her in interviews that the time she returned from the United States after the death of her husband was a period during which she was absent mentally, physically, and emotionally. She claimed that the show turned out to be a really effective healer. When I was here, listening to the stories of everyone else, I realized that I wasn't the only one. Instead, they will simply encircle you with their arms. This location helps me to heal my heart. When she was asked about her early experiences, she revealed that she was hesitant to participate in the show. However, she regarded it as the beginning of her personal restoration, and she called Jay a vital presence that helped her to remain stable. Along with my brother, Jay was a significant contributor to my recent resurgence of confidence in myself. The general public, on the other hand, was familiar with Jay because of his warmth and emotional participation. For instance, he came close to crying while witnessing a recreated radiogram from the Windrush era bring tears to the eyes of a family on TV. Off camera, however, his life was filled with complexities, including a divorce, charges of controlling conduct from his ex-wife, and a terrible public reckoning that he did not explicitly confront. He did not address any of these issues. On the other hand, something significant flourished in the silence that Suzie and Jay shared with one another. It seemed that recognition was the foundation of their connection rather than anything else. After surviving a dominant marriage, Suzie was in the process of reconstructing her life. Jay was confronted with his own weaknesses. It is a distance, not having a home. I was on the verge of reaching my lowest point, but I was able to find healing via acts of compassion, community, and craft. They never made their relationship a public spectacle, Suzie and Jay. They did not take advantage of anyone's speculation or create situations for social media promotion. Neither of them had to do it. Small gestures, knowing glances, quick conversations after filming, and a silent presence on their part when one of them stumbled were all examples of how their mutual respect was demonstrated. It was a stillness that spoke volumes. It was strategic and protective in nature, strong and mutually beneficial. Suzie never forced declarations, and Jay never imposed his narrative on whoever was listening. Rather than that, they opted for consistency. The defining characteristic of their link was not performance, but rather consistency. But there is a limit to how much even the most powerful silences can contain. The year 2024 was drawing to a close, and Jay found himself at a fork in the road during this time. The point at which the wordless could no longer be concealed from view. At the point of no return as the year 2024 drew to a close, the careful equilibrium that Jay had maintained between his public image and his private truth started to show signs of strain. The interview, which was meant to be a normal one and was allegedly planned as an exclusive but gentle investigation of his life, soon morphed into a moment that was charged with significance that was not anticipated. The inquiry that was asked was not specifically directed towards Suzie Fletcher, nor was it overtly about her. In spite of this, it cut to the core of Jay's innermost thoughts and feelings, which he had carefully concealed for many years. The topic of regret, the weighty burden of words that were not spoken, and admissions that had been buried for a long time beneath layers of respect, discretion, and self-restraint were all touched upon. When Jay eventually broke the stillness, his remarks were kind but thoughtful, carrying the weight of the years of restraint that were suddenly disintegrating. It was a revelation that shocked everyone who was there because it was unfiltered, genuine, and shocking in its honesty. I am no longer able to conceal this. On the other hand, what followed was not at all the kind of revelation that anyone had anticipated. The next thing that happened was a disturbing disclosure, one that sent ripples beneath the surface of their friendship and hinted at intricacies that very few people could have imagined. He didn't talk about romance in the conventional sense, and he didn't rely on the tried-and-true cliches of friendship or mutual support either. The truth, which was as unpleasant as it was real, was instead admitted by the individual. This was something that he had never expressed in public, not even to those who were closest to him. I was shielding her and myself from the aspects of myself that were on the verge of destroying everything, he replied, maintaining a steady yet low voice the entire time. The revelation that he made was that their relationship had turned into a battlefield where not only affection but also survival was taken into consideration. It was not just as a friend that Suzie had been there for him. She had also been there to protect him from his most sinister inclinations. those experiences in which Jay himself was afraid of what he might develop into. He acknowledged that I was concerned not with what other people might say, but rather with the possibility of losing control and allowing everything to fall apart if I allowed myself to become too close. The fear of being vulnerable was not the only factor. It was a haunting vulnerability, the kind that bears shadows of past grief, issues with mental health, and battles fought far from the public view. It was a weakness that carried intangible memories. The presence of Suzie had been a lifeline for him, bringing him back when he was falling and assisting him in clinging to whatever fraction of serenity he could find. Jay is said to have admitted that he was frightened of stating it out loud because doing so would have meant acknowledging how vulnerable I actually am. Suzie Fletcher, on the other hand, managed to transform me. This moment was more than just a discovery. It was a powerful release. Several years of steadfastly maintaining a precarious equilibrium were abruptly thrown off by the truth. Truth that was both beautiful and awful, straightforward yet profoundly complicated all at the same time. Reports indicate that Jay did not rush to assign a title to the things that he and Suzie shared. The fact that it was stated was not required. The things that he decided to disclose went beyond specific titles or definitions. He talked about how Suzie had stayed with him even when he was at his lowest and most broken point in his life. While he was living in a world that was constantly moving, she had shown him how to find peace and tranquility. Beyond the spotlight, beyond the scrutiny of the public, and beyond the unrelenting pressure to perform and succeed, her calm strength served as a mirror, reflecting back the best aspects of who he was. In exchange, Jay had turned into her guardian, not only of her solitude but also of her tranquility. He remained silent and waited, assisting her in regaining her voice when the silence got too loud for her to contain. They worked together to cultivate a connection that gradually and profoundly healed over the course of time, in the way that only time and shared adversity can do. Fans who had been contemplating their relationship for a considerable amount of time did not find this to be a shocking headline or a scandalous secret. Grace was seen here. There was a genuine human connection here. On the subject of Suzie Fletcher, Jay Blades eventually exposes everything and opens up about the situation. Have you ever tried to protect someone else by withholding the truth, even if it meant that you had to give up your peace? In the comments section, please share your ideas. We appreciate you taking the time to view this video with us, and we hope to see you in the next one.